Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I am the CHALL. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are watching this, and welcome to a brand new edition of the DRFC Press Talk, analysing Grant McCann's pre-match press conferences and soon post-match conferences. Stay tuned on Monday. But we've got Tom Coates here with the Yorkshire Post. Tom, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. How are you?
Very good. Good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, delighted to be back. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. So obviously we've just had the pre-match conference ahead of this weekend's match against Accrington Stanley. Before we get into that, we have to first talk about the notes said about the Walsall game, just to give you a bit of a recap and give you some of your thoughts and your side of the story on the Walsall game. We know McCann came out today and said about the Walsall game, the first half were a bit slow, we're a bit static, a much improved second half. And from your perspective on the Walsall game, it wasn't, I think, compared to the last few performances, the best performance. But what it was we soaked up the control at Walsall in the first half. We turned it into our own pressure in the second half and made it count with our chances.
Yeah, I think what it was a game that Doncaster would have lost maybe even 4 or 5 months ago, maybe even 3 months ago. There were so many instances earlier on in the season where Doncaster were sort of losing control of the game. Like that's thing in the opening half an hour in particular, Doncaster weren't really in the driving seat. And they found it earlier in the season. They found it really hard to sort of wrestle back that control. But you saw how sort of calm and composed they remained, sort of in the face of a side who started like a house on fire, really. Obviously Walsall had the better of the first half, but I think it's a sign of a team that's in form and that's full of confidence that despite the start that they made, that they managed to roll back in the manner that they did. I've mentioned to you a couple of times when we recorded the last one that Grant McCann's a very cool head, and I think he transmits that to the team as well. That that no one was getting flustered; it was all very calm and composed, and that's what you need. And the problem is with the form that Doncaster are in now, you've got to get ahead of them. If you're in the ascendancy and you're in control of a game, you've got to make it count because the table, it lies to an extent regarding the type of team that Doncaster are now. On form, they're the best team in the league. So if you don't capitalise on sort of your possession and your chances, then you're going to get punished. It's the same way, if you watch a Premier League game and a lower end club are playing one of the big boys, you always think after that they've had 10 minutes where they've had a flurry of chances, you turn to whoever you're watching it with and go, right, well, that's going to come back to bite them. And it's exactly the same premise here. So yeah, really good result for Doncaster. It's so cliche, but it's the sign of a good side that you can get a win when you've not had a complete performance over the course of 90 minutes. So yeah, another really important win for Doncaster, and with every win that they pick up, that belief just keeps growing, which is massive. It's keeping that belief going, because problem is, if it happens, as soon as you hit a roadblock, that belief disappears very quickly. So it's really good to see them carrying on getting results.
Absolutely, and it's what, 7 in a row now for the first time in 77 years. No matter what's happened earlier on in the season, the club have made history this season officially, and they could make it again because, of course, you've got 4 games remaining of the season now: Accrington, Barrow, Colchester, and Gillingham. You could say on paper, with the form currently of those teams, you could say potentially Rovers could win all 4 of them. And if that's the case, they break their own club record for the longest streak of wins in club history, which could be a massive record to break considering where we were about 2 months ago in the season. So if Rovers do intend to win those last 4 games, including the game tomorrow, and do intend to break club record history and try and sneak into 7th place because of that, what do Rovers need to do to achieve that? Because we know that sides like Accrington are a good forward-thinking team. We know what they did against Newport. Barrow's not been in the best of form, yet they're still in a playoff place. They can still grab hold of that if they just turn it on. We know Pete Weld's got Manager of the Month for March, so either that's a curse to make them be worse, or it could spur them on. It could have the opposite effect to what it usually has. Colchester are fighting for a relegation, fighting out relegation. They're going to be in a dogfight. They're going to be up for the fight. And Gillingham have just missed out on a playoff place, probably. So, they might be on the beach potentially. So that's probably one of the only fixtures you could say is probably on the beach, along with maybe Accrington. So what do Rovers need to do to get the wins out of those 4 and give themselves the best possible chance of sneaking into that 6th or 7th spot?
It's just a case of more of the same, really. I don't think at this stage of the season there's any point ripping up the plan book and going down different avenues. It's a case of just maintaining the momentum. The momentum. So yeah, it's just a case of more of the same, really. And you use the phrase "on the beach" there, and that's something that really comes into play at this stage of the season. And I think it's one of the reasons the run-ins are so important. And if you look at the fixture list, I think the sides that are playing teams who perhaps haven't got as much to play for, they're not in danger of relegation, but haven't got a particularly good chance of going up. I think those are the sides that you're going to fancy the most to sort of have a late surge and a strong end to the season, which why, absolutely no disrespect to Accrington, they're a good side. Obviously, they've had a bit of turbulence with John Coleman moving on after the amount of time he's been there, but, they've got some good players and they've, on their day, they can play good football. But I think they're probably the perfect side for Doncaster to play at this stage of the season. I think if you're playing someone who's in danger of going down, they're going to scrap with absolutely everything they've got. And that can be really difficult to go up against. Likewise, for very obvious reasons, you don't want to go up against the best teams in the league. So I think, again, no disrespect to Accrington, I think they're almost the ideal opponent for Doncaster, certainly this weekend. So, yeah, it's a case of more of the same. Just keep believing, really. It sounds really basic, but at this point, things are working. The ideas that Grant McCann has, in fairness to him, been trying to get across from the very start of the season. It's not a case of we've crept into February, March, April, and he's gone. He's opened up a new book of tactics and thought, I'm going to change everything here. He came into the club with a very clear idea of what he wanted his Doncaster Rovers side to look like, and as we touched on last week, for various reasons he wasn't able to implement that. And I've used the phrase a couple of times in pieces I've written that we're seeing the real Doncaster Rovers now. We're seeing the Doncaster that was always there, that was always threatening to show itself, but I think we're seeing it now. So yeah, I think it's just a case of sticking to what works and just carrying on.
Absolutely. So without further ado, let's get straight into what McCann has been speaking about in this press conference. First of all, injuries. McCann says the squad is as it is from the Walsall game, so Biggins is fine. However, there is one exception from that squad, and of course, that is Maxime Biamou. We found out the news today. He's expected 10 to 12 weeks. That's his season done. With him out of contract, with him being on a short-term deal, that could be the last time we see him in a Rovers shirt. In my personal opinion, no offense to Maxime Biamou, because I think he's done great since he's come in, but I don't think we see him in a Rovers shirt anymore. I don't think we offer him a contract because I think there is that risk attached. So, I mean, would you agree with that, Tom? Do you think it's the end of Maxime Biamou as a Rovers player? And if so, and whether he is or not, how big of a loss of impact could that be? And how big could that be for the likes of your Billy Waters maybe to step up from the bench and try and be that impact sub?
It's anyone's guess, really. I wouldn't really want to be drawn on a prediction, to be honest, because it's a difficult one to call. He's been fantastic since he's come in. I think he offers something a little bit different to Joe White inside. He's a real presence in and around the box. I think he occupies the centre halves really well, and he's one of those. And we discussed this just before we started recording. When Doncaster, when it sort of was mentioned that he was a player Doncaster were looking at before he came in on a short-term contract, bearing in mind he's played in the Championship for Coventry, he's the sort of player you look at and think, well, why? Why is he available? Why is no other clubs come in for him? Why is he being a free agent for the period of time that he has been one? He's been a great signing. I thought he was a real coup for Doncaster, even in spite of his injury problems. But and again, it's purely speculation because I don't have access to his medical records, and I'm not, I don't know his body like he will. It's a case of whether this is going to be a repetitive thing. If the body's constantly breaking down and he's picking up regular injuries, that's obviously going to be a bit of a red flag for Doncaster. But who knows? I don't. The extent of the injury, it's only just been broken. It's not certain how long he's going to be out for. And if it does prove to be something he gets over in relatively quick fashion, then it might work in his favour when it comes to potentially getting a longer term contract. But I think my guess would be that it will come into the thinking when it comes to offering him a contract or not offering him a contract. But with that being said, it comes into the thinking of everyone. And another thing we touched on last week is that when we were talking about summer recruitment, I do think injury record is something that Doncaster will really have in mind. It's obviously an area that's massively damaged the club this season in terms of the amount of injuries that they've had. You've had a little bit of a revamp in the medical department. There was, a massive change at the club and something that Grant McCann has pointed out as something that's been a real positive influence. So I think fitness of players and injury record, I think there's a very good chance that's, you know, something that's really considered going into the summer. And whether that goes against Biamou, you know, it remains to be seen. But it's just a case of how long he takes to recover really now.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Obviously, one big return to the squad for this one, and I did put him on the bench in my preview from earlier this afternoon, and that is, of course, Tom Anderson, back from his 3-game suspension. Obviously, McCann's come out and said in the press conference, obviously, he's always juggling between who he picks. Everyone's ready to go. 1 or 2 extra bodies back on the training pitch as well. Taylor's back in training as well, so that's a little extra positive as well. But with Tom Anderson coming back into the fold as well, I mean, Joe Oliver's put some good performances since he's come back into the starting 11 over Anderson's suspension period. How difficult will it be for Tom Anderson to get back in the starting 11? Because him and Will struck up an incredible partnership before that suspension at Morecambe, I think it was. And Oliver's come in and done an incredible job to fill the role and add some pace and some real balance, which is why I thought a young left-footed centre-back with a lot of potential would be a big summer recruitment job, because I thought that would be a bit of an addition of that pace and balance we see with Oluwu, and someone who can really back up Oluwu. We know Wood's not going to start every single one of the 46 games plus the cup matches. We also found out that Bobby Faulkner's signing a 1-year extension. So, you know, when you've got Faulkner there, you've got Anderson there, you've got Wood there as your stoppers, you've got Oluwu and maybe even a young left centre-back on that side. How big is it for Tom Anderson to try and come back into this side? And if so, what does he need to do to get ahead of Oluwu right now, especially with the potential of a defender in the summer as well?
It's going to be difficult. It's certainly not going to be easy. And you know, it all comes down to sort of performances in training and what Grant McCann's seen behind closed doors. Because, you know, before Tom Anderson, you know, was brought out of the side, that partnership, as you mentioned, that he struck up with Richard Wood was really impressive. It was, you know, pretty formidable at League Two level. You know, Wood coming back into the side was a massive, you know, one of the big reasons for the uplift, I think. And, you know, that partnership he had with Anderson was really good. Really, you know, you've got 2 really experienced figures who've been there and done it and can marshal the defence really well, especially when you've sort of got younger players either side in front of you. It's really good to have those experienced voices. But that being said, I've really liked the look of Wood next to Oluwu as well. You know, particularly against Wrexham, I thought they were fantastic together. You know, it's a really healthy dilemma to have, and it's the sort of thing that, you know, Grant McCann's spoken about a couple of times in the last couple of weeks about how he spent, you know, the first half of the season having to just reel off these massive lists of injuries, and now he's looking at key positions like centre back and thinking, well, do I play this partnership, which has looked really good, or do I play this other partnership, which has looked really good? And you know, it's a very nice problem to have. You know, having Tom Anderson generally back in the squad is massive, because he's been at the club a long time now. He's a great figure to have around, and it's a boost regardless that he's back. And yeah, Grant McCann's got a really healthy dilemma on his hands now, and it's just a case of whether. It's a case of what he's seeing behind closed doors, a mix of that and how he thinks, you know, looking beyond purely which is the better partnership and who's performing better in training. You're going to be looking at the type of strikers that you're coming up against. You're coming up against sort of bruising target men who are, you know, perhaps going to want to get in a tussle, or are you looking at, you know, smaller, pacey players who want to drop deep, players who want to play on the last man. And I think the type of striker that you come up against will be a massive part of the thought process when it comes to choosing the centre back. So I think it'll be a case by case basis. I don't think by any means Grant McCann will now be sitting down and deciding on a partnership for the rest of the season. I think it will continually be assessed game by game, but that's the way you've got to look at it. And again, it's a very nice problem to have.
Absolutely. And, you know, just continuing on Tom Anderson a second, I mean, we've just got to think about this, that he's out of contract next summer in 2025. And, you know, by that point, by the end of next season, he'll have served 9 years at the football club, which means, and I think I'm getting this right, 10 years is worth of testimonial, correct?
Yeah, I believe, decade.
So, you know, what do the club do? Do they look at next season and then decide whether to keep him on for at least one more year, for that 10th year, to give him that testimonial? What do you think the plan could be for Tom Anderson? I know I'm opening this discussion quite early because it's not even next summer yet, it's this summer. But I felt like opening this conversation and starting to talk about this Tom Anderson situation, because it's a very big season for him next season. Because if he doesn't deliver on a consistent basis, which, you know, let's be brutally honest here, there has been times this season, in the first half of the season, where maybe fans have seen not the best of him or the best version of him that we've seen previously in a few years. But he's come on leaps and bounds since then. And if he continues on the form that he is currently, he'll have earned the right to a brand new contract, which could involve going beyond that 10th season, which involves a testimonial. So early discussions, do we feel like Tom Anderson is continuously putting in performance at the moment, which could earn the right to a better deal going forward? Do we feel like Tom Anderson's earning that deal at the moment, which will lead towards a testimonial? Because personally, on the form that he's shown before his suspension, people can call me cynical or anything like that, but I think he's earned the right for a testimonial.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, you'd say, yeah. He's a player that, he's had dips, certainly this season. But you get that, especially when you've been at a club a long time. You can't, certainly the length of time he's been at Doncaster, you can't be expected to constantly be a reliable performer. You're going to have dips in form over long periods of time. Obviously, we're thinking quite far ahead, but I think if you look at a player like Tom Anderson, even if he's not starting for you every week, he's going to be an asset for you, even in terms of his experience and his nous. The way you can bring on players around him, similar to Richard Wood in that respect. I think he's he's someone that's a really respected figure at Doncaster and just generally in the game. So I think character comes into it as well, and it's just a case of consistency with Tom Anderson. I think, if he can get to a point where he nails down a place in the starting 11 and he's consistently, delivering at the very least 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10s, then I think it'll be a no-brainer to keep him on. But it's just a case of how the club goes about the business. If they put a progression plan in place for how they want to upgrade in the centre-back department and they identify, more than one player and there's the opportunity to bring players in, then, football's a very ruthless business. It cares little for sentimentality a lot of the time. And, to testimonial or no testimonial, I think it won't come into that. It might creep into the thinking, but I would guess that it wouldn't, because it's got to be a purely footballing decision. You can't. You've got to do what's best, for the playing squad. So, it's obviously a little bit further down the line in terms of the discussion, when not quite at the point where we need to be having it yet. But I think my early indications would be that he's not. I don't think he'll be a player that'll be looking to shove out the door at the first opportunity, purely because of how good of a servant he's been and the fact that he's still a player who can be a really reliable centre half at League Two level.
Absolutely. I'd like to, and people know my stance on this. My stance on Tom Anderson's always been the same. It's been, let's see what happens next season. If he shows what he can do, give him a new contract, let him have the testimonial. If he wants to leave or if he doesn't show enough, let him go out that season with his 9 years on a high, give him a proper send-off. I've said the same about Tommy Rowe and John Taylor at the end of their contracts this year. I've said, if they're going to leave or they're going to start in a different role other than a full-time player, give them a send-off on the last home game against Barrow. Speaking of John Taylor, obviously McCann spoke to him in a bit of detail today. It's the best he's been currently in terms of getting back into training. Obviously, he's got really bad luck with his injuries, and such bad luck with injuries was the quote from McCann. However, he's apparently eventually, from quote unquote or paraphrasing, got to the root of his problems. So, what could be the situation on John Taylor? Do you think we'll see him before the end of the season, or do you think there's a case of we'll see what happens in pre-season and it's kind of like an Ollie Younger situation where we kind of help pay for his medical, help pay for his recovery, and then decide on the contract situation after that period? Because on his day, he's still a very good, experienced player, but the fans, from the fans' perspective, and from what I've noticed from the fans' perspective, is he's had too many injuries. Even though it's not his fault, it's a case of we can't really put up with that on a wage basis.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously great news that he's back out on the pitch. He's obviously a player who's got serious pedigree at this level, someone who I feel would have had a huge impact this season if he'd have been able to stay fit and got any sort of consistent run of games together. Yeah. At this stage of the season, especially considering how well Doncaster are actually doing and the fact that, they've been winning week after week, there's no point rushing him back because, if you're not requiring, certainly if you're not needing him to come and dig you out a hole, which obviously Doncaster don't, they're doing pretty well in his absence. It's in the best interest of him to give him the time that he needs to properly recover, because it's not just a case of is he well enough to play in terms of his actual injury. Is match fitness is for the period of time that he's been out. Match fitness it's going to take a while to get that back and get full sharpness. And if I had to guess, again, it's guesswork. I'm not entirely sure whether we will see him before the end of the season, but my guess would be that to potentially, risk him by bringing him back too soon certainly when he's not even going to be 100% match fit and sharp, it sort of seems to me like a risk not worth taking. And, that's not to say that he couldn't be an asset, even if coming off the bench. But I think, the Doncaster team at the moment is pretty settled. It's probably the most settled it's been all season. And, I don't think there's any real need to disrupt that. And if you're not disrupting the team, you're keeping a winning team together and giving a long-term absentee the sufficient time to get back to match fitness and sharpness, then it's a win-win. It's a win for both parties. So yeah, obviously it's great news that he's back. And I do think, obviously he's had his injury issues, but I think a John Taylor with a full pre-season under his belt is a real asset. I think if that situation did play out where you could get him fully recovered and you got him first day of pre-season fit, raring to go, then I think it'd be a massive boost. But it remains to be seen. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with him, to be honest.
Yeah, it's going to be very much a mystery between now and the end of the season and going into pre-season to see what the situation will be on John Taylor and what he decides to do at the end of the season as well. Obviously, Hakeeb Adelakun has been one of the big talking points from the fan base. He's been one of the main ones at the end of the Turn Him Up chants in the South Stand and across the stadium. The official quote from the Adelakun interview, in recent days is, "He's in a bubble he doesn't want to get out of." That was the official quote from Hakeeb Adelakun. And Grant spoke about him being in top form at the moment. And this is an interesting one because obviously there's been press articles in the last few days of kind of, fans need to park the bus on him, just let him enjoy it. And, it's that whole kind of basis of don't worry about signing him up at the minute, just let him focus on his football, let him focus on enjoying his football, which he is doing at the moment. Obviously, he wants to stay in the region. I think I don't know if he's been living in Donny a while, but he wants to stay in the region. I think obviously I don't want to put any pressure on you because obviously you remember. There's a big question amongst the Rovers fan base: will Adelakun sign for Doncaster Rovers? And I want to let him enjoy his football for the rest of the season and just see what happens in the summer because we know we'll have replacements lined up if he doesn't sign. But everyone really wants him to sign, and it feels like it's one of those deals that's a no-brainer, but you just don't know what's going on inside of someone's head yet.
Yeah, listen, I'd love to be able to sit here and tell you that he's definitely going to stay, but it's not something I could confirm. I mean, it's not just a case of something that happens at Doncaster. Across football now, certainly when it comes to players and they get asked about the futures, it's very rare that they get drawn on making any sort of statement. And that's not to say that I know a lot of fans see these interviews and see these press conferences where a player gets asked, are you going to be here next season? And they give sort of a wishy-washy answer where they don't really answer it. And a lot of people get downtrodden by it. Oh, we're losing him. And it's not the case. They can't really commit because there's so many, balls in the air when it comes to deciding where you're going to be next season and the process that you go through. A million things could happen. There could be other clubs that come in with enticing offers. And, if that happens and he's said he's committed to Doncaster and then he goes, he's sort of selling people a dream. On the flip side, it could be a case Doncaster could, potentially look elsewhere. You never know. It seems unlikely considering how well he's done, but a million things could change. So much could change. His personal circumstances, family, whatever it might be. There's so many moving parts when it comes to summer transfers. And I do think it's sort of like in an era of FIFA career mode and Football Manager, people like to think it's very black and white when it comes to transfers. It's a case of, well, are you staying? Are you doing this move? Well, why not? And we're wanting answers all the time. And it's only natural. I understand it.
Yeah.
We're all football fans. We all get it. But I do think, patience is a virtue, and it's definitely required a little bit in his case, and with the case of any other player that you want to know what's happening with them between now and the end of the season, before next season, because like I say, there's so many moving parts. There's, you've got player, agent, club, other clubs, and between those, so many things can change. Circumstances, whether when they talk about transfer windows and dominoes falling. This club signs this player or sells this player, which means that this happens in the transfer market. So much can change, and that it doesn't really benefit the player for them to come out and make a sweeping statement, whether it's I'm leaving or I'm staying, because there's every chance that circumstances change within the next weeks and months, and then later down the line they're getting called a liar or they're getting told that they sold a fan base a dream, or they've misled a manager or a club, and
Yeah.
it's not worth the hassle. And I think certainly with the form that he's in at the moment, he's very much doing the right thing by just reiterating the fact that he wants to focus on his football, and Doncaster will be fine with that, because a focus to keep Adelakun, they're reaping the rewards of that at the moment. And I'm sure the conversation will come in the summer, where they sit down and they talk about whether he stays or whether he goes. But for now, and again, I appreciate it's definitely not the answer Doncaster fans want, but summer transfer windows are complicated enough without trying to sort of push players into answering these questions. And obviously, it's our job. We're going to ask the question. I will, if I'm on a Doncaster press conference between now and the end of the season, I'm sure it's a question that I'll float if we spoke to him. But I think the chances of him getting drawn on that are highly unlikely. Even when we spoke to Matthew Craig a couple of weeks ago, and he said he would be open to the possibility of staying for another season at Doncaster, but it was in no way him saying it was happening. It was him saying he was open to it. But you can be open to a lot of things. You can be he could be open to the move today and then not tomorrow. Things change so fast. So yeah, you're right when you say it's a no-brainer. It does feel like it. It does feel like you've got a player who's rediscovered his best form in an environment that he seems very happy in, with a manager that he enjoys working for, with a squad that he seems to have settled into really quickly. And then you've got a club who have had a real injection of attacking excitement in the final third when they really needed it. So both club and player have benefited from the arrangement that they've had. And because of that, it does seem logical that you would have him stay around. But again, so much can change, and it's anyone's guess as to whether he'll stay. If I had to guess, if I was a betting man, I think I'd probably guess he would, just because it makes sense. But again, so many moving parts that could change that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, the summer transfer window is very complicated. It's not as black and white as your FMs and your FIFA and your EAFC, should we say. We're not saying FIFA anymore.
Yeah, showing my age there.
But no, it's much more complicated. Like you said, there's not just the geographical constraints and the personal constraints. It's also the financial constraints, any additional bonuses, any additional clauses. If we get promoted, you earn X amount of money extra. The wage every week. Obviously the clubs that haven't got major rich owners, they're not bottomless pits of money. And yes, we've got a wealthy chairman and a wealthy owner, but we are not a bottomless pit of money. We haven't got the biggest budget in the league, so we can only be restrained to a certain confined amount of money. And again, this is where end of contracts come in. This is where the people that leave, how much wage do they free up? What's the budget Grant's got to work with? How much did he want? Did he get what he want? Again, these are all what makes the summer transfer window very, very complicated. And this kind of leads on to a final big point before we finalize the video by talking about Accrington coming up tomorrow. Is Doncaster Rovers are very much a football club that keep their cards very close to their chest. They do not deal their hand all in open to the public. They're very closed in-house. And I think in an era, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, in an era where it's very much an open industry where fans want to know everything and they want to know every single bit of detail from every single bit of football club, I think Doncaster Rovers, being a club that keeps their cards close to their chest until it gets announced by the club, it could be seen as a smart thing to do, which I think it is a smart thing to do, because you're keeping your opposition clubs guessing, you're keeping your rivals guessing, and that means you get first dibs. On the other hand, in an industry where people want to know everything, it could be seen as frustrating by supporters, because the frustration and the anger of supporters, they want to know what's going on. If there's a player they love that's out of contract, they want to know if he's signed or not. But like you said, it's very, very complicated. Things keep moving, things keep changing, and it's a very, very big thing. I was part of this, last season when we spoke about transfers during the summer. I was hearing from numerous people about Kieran Freeman. I was hearing about Sean Rowan from Lincoln on loan. And one minute it looked like it was potentially happening. And then the second day it was like, oh, the wage hasn't been agreed and there's not enough that's been given to offer a wage. And then it didn't happen. And then some people were saying to me, oh, it was never going to happen. No, it was going to happen, but the wage didn't get agreed. And whether that was true or not, it was still a moving situation. So having Doncaster Rovers as a club that keeps their cards close to their chest could be a smart thing, but it also could be a frustrating thing. How important is it for Doncaster Rovers to keep the balance of keeping their cards close to their chest without it being too frustrating for the fans.
Yeah, of course, it's important, and communication with fans is really difficult. Again, it's something else that is not as black and white as people make it out to be, because realistically, the success of a club's media approach is sort of completely determined, whether fans do it consciously or not. It's completely determined by how well things are going on the pitch. So, for example, Doncaster are flying at the moment, and they have been reeling off announcements, with the contract renewals, but there will still be some fans saying they wish there was more transparency on contracts and they wish they were saying more and showing more. But realistically, at the moment, so obviously you're more involved in those circles than me. People aren't going to be losing their heads at Doncaster's communication strategy because things are going well on the pitch. A lot of people now, like you saying, oh, you think it's wise that they play the cards pretty close to the chest. Now, I would agree. I think it's good, but at the same time, if they were losing every week, people would be saying the communication strategy is rubbish and saying, you should be more transparent, should give us more information. It's all completely determined by on-field performance. In the same way that, it stretches to everything in the digital age, whether it's a TikTok video they've done or an interview they've put on Twitter or whatever it might be. Like people's opinions of media output and communication strategy, I find is always just, again, I think it genuinely is subconscious for a lot of people. I don't think people even realize they're doing it. But if a team starts losing, they're going to tear the whole house down. They'll criticize absolutely all aspects of a football club. You get beaten 2-1 at the weekend, and all of a sudden it's, they should sack the head chef and the communications manager's rubbish. And football fans are, not everyone, obviously, but there is a tendency along a lot of football fans to be very all or nothing. Either everything's fantastic, the club's going to win the league, we're fantastic, there's no one better than us, everything's great, give them all £100 million contracts, or it's all rubbish, sack everyone, liquidate the club, start from scratch. And
I see this in the Premier League. I see this in the Premier League. I was on the Football Terrace and I spoke with some Tottenham fans. There was a couple of fans on there. Well, there's one in particular that was very much, we're going to, I think it was like 9 games in, we're going to win the league. And then same with the biggest club in North London. When you've got Arsenal there, you've got Chelsea in that mix as well. And then, I 100% agree with you. It's football to some fans is so black and white, but what they don't realize is football is actually grayer than it is. It's so much more 50-50 that, it's very much, there's a middle ground in between the do's and the don'ts. And football is very much a middle ground. Just some people don't know that.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. It's just it's very, football fans are reactionary, and they always will be. It'll never change. It's just the way it is. But even we've even seen, for example, this season with Doncaster, sort of even with the social media engagement we get at the Yorkshire Post, for example, the tone of the comments, and the way people react to what Grant McCann says is completely different now. Because you're winning, and that's no slight against Doncaster Rovers fans. It's what all fans do across the board, of all clubs. You get it all the time, and it's for example, I can think of a million examples off the top of my head, like Sheffield Wednesday under Danny Roll, for example. He's had a lot of praise for the work he's done there, but they lose one game, and people start saying, "Oh, well, is Roll actually as good as people think he is?" Leeds United are the same in the promotion race all season in the Championship. They lose to Coventry, they draw against Sunderland, and all of a sudden, is Daniel Farke all that? And that, again, I'm not saying this is what all fans are saying, but you start to see these comments cropping up, and your football fans are very reactionary, and things change very fast. But yeah, in terms of the communication strategy, I sometimes feel like football clubs can never really win. And that's the thing you're talking about. Some fans maybe wanting more transparency in terms of contracts and stuff, but I've seen it on the other side as well. I've seen clubs get criticised because they're giving away too much, and we're showing our hand, and we're just giving everything away. And it's realistically, that people will say, oh, well, there's a middle ground you should find that's perfect, but no one can really ever define where that middle ground is. It's very difficult, and that's not me just sticking up for all clubs. I'm that there will be clubs out there that get things wrong when it comes to communication. There'll be some clubs that do it better than others, but I do think and again, you mentioned it, it's because information's everywhere and people want it, and the more you give, the more they want, and it'll get to a point where it's never enough, nothing's enough. But yeah, I think football clubs have a really delicate balance to strike with that, and I think, but that's the thing, I actually think Doncaster, in terms of, and again, I'm probably not as a regular observer of what the content that goes out as you are, for example, or the Doncaster fans listening to this. But as an outsider looking in, it sort of seems like Doncaster have been pretty transparent. Like even in the fact that they've been announcing new contracts, sort of, and making that known that they would be fully within their rights for them to not make that known if they didn't want it to be known. I saw the video when they did an evening with Grant McCann and Cliff Byrne. That's something that not all clubs do. Not all clubs give fans the opportunity to speak to managers and the assistant manager as it comes to the end of the season. And if I remember rightly, that's how they announced Richard Wood's contract. Like you don't see that from most clubs. So I would actually argue that in terms of transparency and sort of the frequency of communication, Doncaster have been pretty good communicators anyway. So like I say, it's something I could really ramble on about, because I think a lot of football fans, again, and not everyone, I can't stress that enough, because I'm not generalising, but I do think there are a lot of fans that don't realise just how fickle they can be sometimes. And we're all guilty of it. I've definitely been guilty of it before. I'm sure you have as well. Like we're all guilty of it. But it's the nature of the beast, and it's why football fans can be the best things in the world and the worst things in the world sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about contracts there. Obviously, the club have been extremely transparent about contracts. Obviously, the big one, people have been asking about is Luke Molyneux. Obviously, alongside the loanee was Luke Molyneux. I mean, that was the kind of big one. And even today, I've started to see a couple of people say on social media, now the longer it goes on, the more I'm doubting he's going to sign. And the big thing to note here, especially with Luke Molyneux, and I think you probably agree with this, is the main reason it hasn't been announced yet is because Luke Molyneux is assessing his options. He knows, and Grant McCann's come out and said this in the press before, you know this. Grant McCann has said, players with contracts running out have got a deadline to sign that contract. If they don't sign it by that date, they're out of here. Luke Molyneux will know what his deadline is. If it hasn't been, if they've had talks before, if Grant McCann's gone to Luke Molyneux and said, this date, whatever date it might be, XXX is your deadline, Luke Molyneux will take as much time as he needs to assess his options, and then like a week before that deadline or a couple of days before that deadline, could even be the day of the deadline, say, right, now I know where my head's at. It's not a case of, the longer it goes on, the more it's not going to happen. It's just a case of Molyneux knows what his deadline is. If he's been given one, he's just assessing his options and assessing where his head's going to be. If he doesn't sign, I'm sure the club will have replacements lined up. If he does sign, fantastic. We've got a good player on the books for at least 2 years. And my prediction is a 2-year contract. But, again, we said it before about the reactionary side of football fans. I think it's very important to mention, specifically mention about Luke Molyneux here, that we just need to just keep a lid on it for a bit, because it's going to take a while, this one.
Yeah, listen, I understand it, but I just don't think there's any point fretting about, contract renewals and who's staying and who's going, when realistically, for a start, how Doncaster do this season will have a massive bearing on it. Do you know what I mean? There's, albeit a relatively slim chance that Doncaster get in the playoffs and maybe go up. There's also a chance that they fade away and it sort of becomes something that never happened. But there's so many balls in the air, so many factors at play when it comes to this. And contract negotiations are tricky. They take time. And it isn't a case of, like I say, when I talked about, football manager and stuff, it's not a case of, here's how much we're going to pay you, here's for how long you're signing or not. Like there's so much more to it than that. There's so much nuance that I don't think a lot of fans appreciate. But listen, you mentioned it. Grant McCann has a way of working when it comes to contract renewals. He gives a deadline. And that's, as we mentioned the last time I was on, it's a really good way of working, because it means Doncaster won't be getting messed about. And if they get the slightest whiff of any player sort of testing the waters and not being 100% committed to Doncaster, they'll be looking at contingencies. And that's probably in place anyway. I'd be very surprised, because it happens at most clubs, that Doncaster will probably have potential options to replace every member of that squad. Absolutely every member, because you've got to have contingencies in place, because even if, say, a player signs a new contract, they could break their leg on the first game of the season, or do you know what I mean? Or in a pre-season friendly. It's one of the most difficult things, sort of, in behind-the-scenes football management. You've always got to be prepared for every eventuality. But the truth is, and Doncaster know this more than most this season, you can't control everything. Some things are just out of your grasp. And if you sign X amount of players and half of them get injured, or if you put a squad together that you think can be really challenging and competitive, and by October, your squad's been decimated by an injury crisis. Do you know what I mean? These are variables that football clubs don't always have control over. So yeah, it's something that I don't think, certainly with Doncaster at the moment, I just enjoy it. Like just enjoy that, not to go all Roy Keane, but just enjoy the fact that you're absolutely flying. Just enjoy the fact that Doncaster are in a position where, despite having spent most of the season in the bottom half of the table, the playoffs is an actual possibility. And that's the thing. I think it's only natural. A lot of Doncaster fans certainly will be looking to next season already. But yeah, I think it's just a case of understanding that it's complicated, and there's every chance. You touched on Luke Molyneux there, and who knows what will happen. There's every chance he stays, but there's also a chance he goes, and it's realistically just a case of understanding that Doncaster will have a plan. There will be a plan, whether you think it's the right plan or not. That's up for anyone to decide. But there'll be contingencies in place. There will be Molyneux. If a deal hasn't been done, there will be alternatives to him, and there'll be a way forward.
Absolutely. And finally, then, for this press talk, we're going to end just a little look about Accrington Stanley. Obviously, just got their first win in 5 league games against Newport in their recent match. However, as we said beforehand, I think they're coming up against Doncaster at the wrong time if you look at the form book. That was their first win in 5. We're looking for 8 wins in a row. For the first time since the 40s, late 40s. We're talking another history-making match here, potentially for Doncaster Rovers. And, Accrington wants to use that win against Newport, a team that will look like we're looking for a late playoff push and maybe just falling off a little bit now and just staying in the league this season under Graham Coughlin. Accrington will want to try and go at them with all guns blazing and build on that. But it's not the best team to come up against. And, I'm not going to doubt Accrington's credentials. They come forward really well. They put the balls in space really well. They press heavy, which is nice. They've got some great talent. Tommy Lee's someone that I'm really keeping an eye out for. Seamus Connolly's a real leader at the back as the captain in the midfield too. It's a similar formation to Rovers, a 4-2-3-1. So, Vitek's a good younger keeper with some great attributes to him, of obviously ex-United youth or United youth. There's some good players in the Accrington team. So what do Rovers need to do to stop a side like Accrington who just got their first win in 5 and try and make it 8 in a row?
Yeah, to play devil's advocate, I would agree. I don't think any side in the division wants to play Doncaster Rovers at the moment. But I think if you're an Accrington fan, certainly if you're a staff member at Accrington, you're thinking that Doncaster are playing Accrington at the best time because they've just had a win to put an end to a little bit of a difficult run for them, and they'll be hoping that that's a turning point and they can finish the season on a high. So you could argue that Doncaster are playing Accrington at the best time either, but on the flip side, you could also say that playing a side that is essentially on the beach at this stage of the season is really beneficial. And, I mentioned it earlier, but I think it is genuinely so important that it's not just the teams that you're playing in the running, it's the type of teams. And I think, and that's by no means to suggest that Accrington won't be going out on Saturday and running and working hard. Of course they will. That even if it's not playoffs, promotion or relegation, there is always things to fight for, whether it's, contracts or your squad status or whatever it might be, a move elsewhere even. There's always something to play for. But I do think even if it is subconscious, there's always just more, and there's more atmosphere as well. Doncaster's fans, when promotion's a possibility, there's always that bit of extra fire. And I think that's going to be absolutely massive. I think in terms of nullifying Accrington, it's more of the same. Like I say, it doesn't particularly lend itself well to analysis the way that Doncaster are playing at the moment, because you're inclined to just say more of the same. It took a bold person to sit here and say that, well, actually, I know Doncaster have won X amount of games on the bounce, but I now think they should adopt this approach suddenly. And, I guess if you get it right, you're viewed as an absolute genius who foreshadowed the potential end of the run. But, I just think it's a case of more of the same. What Doncaster are doing at the moment is working. They are being tactically flexible in terms of adopting their approach slightly for certain opponents. But I actually think, certainly in the games that I've seen, you've sort of been able to see, obviously with certain slight deviations, a clear way of playing and a clear way that McCann wants his side to look. And I don't think there's really much benefit to going gung-ho and ripping everything up and changing it now, because things are going so well, and you don't fix something that's not broken. So yeah, it's just a case of more of the same. And there's going to be loads of confidence going into this game, because everything's just going so well, and you've got to use that. You've got to use that, ride on the wave a little bit, and you even the Walsall game. I know we just discussed it earlier. Even when Walsall were on top, knowing how Doncaster are playing, you're never going to write them off, and that's the exciting thing at this stage of the season with the position that they're in. You're never going to write them off because they've shown time and time again that they've got it in them to come back and bounce back.
Absolutely. There we go. That's the end of another episode of Press Talk. Obviously, I'm sure you'll be back next week for the pre-Barrow one.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I'll have to check my calendar.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much, guys, for watching another episode of DRFC Press Talk. Tom, thank you very much for joining me again this week.
Cheers for having me, mate.
Thank you very much, and thank you guys for watching. Make sure you do like, comment, subscribe. And for now, I'm the CHALL Tarot. For now, stay tuned for the reaction and review to Accrington on Saturday and Sunday, and that is full time.